Okay, you guys are there. How's the sound? Might take me a second to get things going here. I gotta check some stuff. Looks like they moved some things around. So I'm not going to be able to see the chat right away, but it looks like you guys are in there. Apparently they show the count is 0, so I never know if anybody's in there because they haven't fixed it yet. And there's a way to break it out into a second chat, but apparently today I'm slow. Hey guys, thought I'd do an early day stream. Looks like we got about, what, 22 seconds? So the sun's out, finally, so things might look a little strange on the desktop, but here we go. So, today I'm going to go over more troubleshooting. A lot of issues occur on this board that are easy to figure out once you understand what's occurring. So what I'm going to start with is we have these fans. Unfortunately, it's hard to tell what's going on with them without power. So I just did a tutorial on how this works, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I will show you how you can use this to troubleshoot. Like over in here, these are two direct power fans. So if we want to actually test them, I'm going to show you first without power, or without the PSU, but they're set up to be 24, 12, and 5 volts for the jumper caps. So this cap currently is on 24, so I'm going to move it to 5 and see if we can get it to work. And this should work off the actual power for the USB, but it's also a little bit variable, so we'll find out. So if I plug it in and I have the jumper cap on right now, we can actually see that it might be working. So what we can do now is we can actually measure it. So I'm going to show you a technique that I use. So I'm going to power that down for a moment. I'm going to take out the actual multimeter. I'm going to set it to voltage, and then we're going to test the voltage. So what I'm going to do is actually put a jumper out here so you can see what I'm measuring. And I'm going to use the ground plane of the board. So when I do that, that means that I'm going to be attaching to something I know is ground. In this case, the ground would be this right here that I'll be probing. So I'll probably come in at this angle, and then I'll touch the actual pin, but I got to figure out which one is voltage. So to do that, we're going to go over to the Big Tree Tech diagram for the board, and I'm going to use this one over here because it's easier to read. So here's the pins that are in question. Normally when you see a square, it's ground, but I don't know why they're messing it up on some places on this board. So if you read their board, sometimes you'll see a ground pin up here. That may be true, but there are places on this board where it's not, such as the enable pin and other places. So don't go by the squares and circles. So over here it is ground, but the top one is the actual fan power. So we know it's either going to be 5, 12, or 24. And then these are the jumpers over here for the different direct current that you'll see. So we're set on this one. So we need to put a jumper on here so we can read it with a jumper wire. So I'm going to grab a jumper wire and go back over to the setup. So on the setup, we're going to hook up that jumper pin to measure it. So I'm going to verify one more time, and I'm going to place the jumper hopefully correctly here so you can see it. And then I'm going to place this right here so I can probe it. So now that we've got that set up, we'll add power to the system being the 5 volts. And the reason I do this is so that I separate things so that I don't accidentally touch something that'll damage the board. So I'm going to place the the probe right here and the other probe right here. And you can see that it's 4.73 volts. So we know that pin is working. And the same goes for working with the other pins on here when you change the jumper cap positions. So I'll show you that in just a second. Let me power down the system. So I'm going to set this to 12 volts, but I have to wait for this to discharge so that all the lights are off. So I'll pop this out with my fingernail and I'll put this on 12 volts. Now I got to actually hook up power. I'm using a 24 volt power supply, or PSU. So as you've seen before, I mark these so that I don't plug them in wrong. And there's been some questions on previous tutorials where I haven't used power, where these appear to be in different positions. That may or may not be true depending upon the version of the board and the directions I was working off at that time. So always refer to the salt screen on the board first, and then if they don't conflict with the directions, you're good to go. but there are other times where they will conflict, and that's when I say contact the actual manufacturer regarding the issue, because they may have made a mistake, or maybe I did. So I'm going to energize the system with power, but before I do that I have to move this off so that it runs off of actual board power. So I'm going to connect this. The jumper is obviously in a different position. The board is energized. So I'm going to go back and put on the voltage. I'm going to grab the probes and do the exact same operation I did before to see if it changes. So I'm going to connect here and then here. And hopefully we'll get something. That's odd. So I might have a loose pin or the jumper isn't fully down. So I'm going to power down the board because I know this works. Give this second discharge. Okay, the light's almost out. Make sure this is connected. Verify that looks okay. Plug it back in. And then measure again. So I'm actually going to plug this in just in case, because that might give me a second ground. Now, two different ground planes can be dangerous if you're on different power supplies for plugs. So here and here, there we go. So it might have been a loose wire, but it's 11.96 volts. So we know that works. So I'm going to try one more and then I'll show you another technique. So I got to wait for this to discharge for a second. Okay, it's almost discharged. Now I can actually touch the board again. So I'll pop this off and I'll put it on 24 volts. Now this is a good one to work on, but these are actually numerical pins for signal pins from here over. So the first 6, the last 2 are direct power pins, but the concept is the same. So I'm going to move back up to volts on the actual multimeter. I'm going to plug this in, and then I'm going to probe again. So here and here, and as you can see it's 24.3 volts. So we know that it actually works. So now that we're done with that, I'm going to power this down, and this one I haven't done in a long time. This is checking signal pins. So there's a way you can set the signal pin to high. So we've got a bunch of pins in here that are signal pins for our end stops. And I got to look up the command for this because I don't remember it. But let me check on the chat real quick. So got a couple people in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, apparently I get to see encoding in here, which confuses me, but that's okay. I'm looking at the main chat for Restream right now, so I'm slightly confused. But let me go over to my desktop, and we're going to go over to the Marlin G codes. So we have a list of G codes here. Now there's one to enable the pin or test it. I can't remember which one it is because it's been a long time. So we're just going to scan through here, and I might search on it in a second. It might be something like debug or set debug. Oop, let's see, set home, hot end. But this is a good way to troubleshoot your board. So let's see, we've got fan off, debug pins. So there's set debug, and apparently this says for the description, for custom hardware not officially supported in Marlin, you can often connect up an unused pin and use M42 to control it. So let's see. Ignore protection on pins that Marlin is using. So sometimes Marlin will have a reserve pin that you can't use. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and set a pin to high. So we're going to actually have to check a couple of things. And I don't know if this is going to work on here or if it's here, because it's been forever. But we'll try these out. So first what we'll do is we'll go over to Pronterface. And we're going to have to power up the board, but we're going to have to find a pin. So what I want to do first is actually find a pin. And I got to get the web browser up here so you can see it. So, hey Lucia. So what we're going to do is we're going to find a pin over here. So I have to find the actual one. So these are Endstop pins. Now as you can see, remember when I was talking about the square pin is not always ground? In this case it's 3.3 volts. So the next one down below it is actually ground. But our signal pin is right here, which is PG11. So we're going to have to figure out a way to test that. And these are set up according to the actual pins file. So I'm going to go over to VS Code for a second. And inside VS Code, I'll show you what they're talking about. So if you go over to your Marlin folder, then your source folder, inside your source folder, there's a pins folder. Inside the pins folder, there's a chipset. So we're looking for STM32F4. This essentially is a database of pins that are outlined in one of these files. So we're going to find the Octopus, and we're using the Pro. So if you click over here, you can see that there's a couple of pins they specify in the Pro and where they are. But if you notice, hopefully it's at the beginning of the file here, it might just be that this file is by itself, but sometimes it points to another file. So in this case, I'm looking at the SKR Pro, not the Octopus Pro, which would be this one. So you can see this is the pins file, but it points to a pins underscore BTT underscore octopus underscore v1 common, which means this part is tacked on to this file, and this overrides whatever is in the other file that is changed. So in this case, there's one pin that looks like it's changed, being PF4, and then maybe some other stuff going on here. So we're going to go to the common file for that, and this is where the rest of the pins will reside. So what we're looking at right here is stall guard pins. In this case, this is the signal pin that's referred to over here. So as you can see, you got PG11, you got PG6, I think that says. Let me see if I can zoom in further. Apparently not. So PG6, if we go over here, we can find out what they're referring to. So PG6 in this case says X minus stop, which is X minimum stop. So it's the minimum setting for your pin. So if we were to go to measure this, we'd have to go to the signal pin. So let's go back over to the board for a second, and we're going to first check what that pin number is, because I forget easily. So it's the bottom pin is the signal. Above that's ground and then voltage. So to measure PG6, we'll do this. And this might not work out as planned because it's been a long time since I've done this. But I'm going to move this over to here, and we'll make an initial measurement. And we can do the measurement either with direct power or USB power. In this case, I prefer to do USB power. So I'm going to put the jumper back. Whoop. Got to unplug this first. Hopefully I didn't harm anything. Now I'll plug this back in, and this will power the board. So we'll turn this back on, and we'll measure the pin again. So I'm going to go off the ground plane of the USB, and I'm going to go here. So right now it says 3.27. So it's got voltage already running through it, but it might go higher or lower depending upon what's going on. So let's go over to Pronterface and see if we can manipulate it. This might not work out like I like, but we'll see. So over in Pronterface, we're going to do M42, and then we're going to say the pin number, which is going to probably be this. So let me copy that for a second and then double check the command. So down here is the example command for set pin state. So let's try the debug pin first, which is M43, and check the example. So give me a second to read through this. Okay, I'm not seeing anything that's helpful, so let's go back to the other one. Let's see what the example here says. So pin is 33, so we'll copy this command after. So let me paste this, or actually copy this command, which is going to be P and then the pin number. Hopefully, this might be a mess. And then S1. Let's see what that says. So turn pin on, and it's P33. So let's check this again. See, I'm nervous about it having a P in front of it. So let's see what we get. First we gotta connect. Now let's do it again. Okay, so let's check the pin state real quick. This might not work like I want. So the probe, and right now we're getting the same value. So let's try messing around with the command. Let me just bring up the chat in case anybody else. Nice to see you. So what I'm trying to figure out is how to drive the pin high. So this is going to be a little bit interesting for me because I haven't done this in a couple of years. Normally I just measure. So digital pin number. And then this set to the state. So let's try setting this to 0 maybe, and seeing if that changes it. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to say S0. Then I'm going to go back over to the board and see what's occurring. Hopefully I'm transitioning here so you can see, which you didn't get to see all of it, but I was double checking the command for the G code. So I'm going to put the probe here and here. And there seems to be no change in state. So that's kind of frustrating. So we might have to check a different pin, but this should work according to what they're talking about. So let me bring this up so you can see what I'm looking at. So let's try debug. So I'm going to actually change it to M43 and see what we get. So change this to 43, and we're going to take out that part for now and press enter. And apparently it's very confused. Unknown command. So still unknown command. Awesome. So apparently this doesn't work like it used to, or I've forgotten how to do it. But there's other ways we can check this. In this case, with the actual Endstop pins, we can actually power down the system. So let me bring you over to the desktop so you can see what I'm doing. So I'm gonna take this out, pop this off, and I'm actually gonna grab an Endstop. So I want to grab a complex one. So I'm going to actually use the older version, and I'll show you what this looks like. So we already know that it's voltage ground signal. So using this Endstop, voltage is red, the black or center wire is ground, and the bottom, being green, is going to be voltage. So we know how to connect that. So we'll connect it like so. I'll put the Endstop where you can see it. Right here, hopefully. And when we use it, this is open, this is closed. So we can check this actually in Pronterface. So I'm going to power that up. And it's already enabled by default. So we're going to go over to Pronterface in a second and see if we can actually see what's going on. So this is the actual command that I use all the time in my videos to check it, which is M119, and I press enter. And you can see that it says triggered. So if I hold this down with my finger and do that same command again, we can see what the state is. So it says open. So right now we know that it's high already when it should be low. So I'm going to show you how to fix that, because this apparently is slightly confusing to understand. So I'm going to go over to my desktop for a second. And inside VS Code, I'm going to go to configuration, and I'm going to search on, let's see, Endstop. If I spell it correctly. There we go. So we see Endstops. Might be a little further down. There we go, Endstop settings. So you can see that X minimum, Y minimum, and Z minimum are only enabled here. There are other ones that you can enable, but the functionality gets a little different depending upon the configuration. Then they talk about how to even out pull-ups and pull-downs. Then we can invert the actual logic. So in this case, we want to change the false to a true. And then we want to actually rebuild with the checkbox. And I'm going to power down the system while you're not looking. Pop out the SD drive and put it in the actual SD card reader. And we'll see if we can fix the logic of what's going on. And I'll check on the chat while this is rolling by. Yeah, on occasion I do go live. Lately we've had a bit of snow. So in the morning it was 1 degree Fahrenheit, which I think is negative 14 Celsius or something, or 15 or 16. I don't remember the exact conversion, but it's a little cold. So I'm going to pop out the actual configuration up here as soon as I minimize this so I can see. So over here, we're going to scroll down and look for the bin. I'm then going to reveal in File Explorer. And then I'm going to send it over to the configuration on the USB. And here's the past one I loaded, and this is the current. For those that don't know, firmware.cur is the last recently loaded firmware. If you want to load it on multiple systems, you can always rename it back to firmware.bin and then plug it into your next system. And if it's successful for that same architecture, it should change to firmware.cur. If it fails, it'll remain firmware.bin. So let me minimize this. And I'm going to go back over to the desktop. I'm going to pop out the drive. Pop it back in to the SD card reader. And then we're going to try this same experiment again. But before I do that, because the firmware is just loaded, I'm going to give it a second to load. And I'm not going to check the actual voltage on the fluke because I know approximately where the pin is over here, but it's hard to reach. But I might be able to do it off of here. So this is probably not a safe way to do it, but we can see if anything changed. So I have to be very careful when I do this, because the pin is located right here. Right now it says that it's a higher voltage than normally would be read. So let's try checking it the other way inside of Pronterface. So if I go back over to Pronterface and I go to connect and then I do the same M119, it now says open. And if I trigger this with my finger and then I do the command again, it does say triggered. So that's one way to troubleshoot this using a G code. Obviously the other way I wanted to do it up here with these G codes was a nightmare. I'll have to do more research because I originally did a tutorial back about 2-3 years ago where I was able to use these, and now they don't seem to function. Plus the pin names are rather interesting, being PG6, so that might be part of the issue. It might be trying to parse this command and sees a second P and then just doesn't know what to do. But originally on the 8-bit configurations for ramps, this was easier. So now that we know how to actually resolve that issue, I'm going to see if we can think about some other issues. One of them is displays. Those are a nightmare because there's so many different displays on the market. So let me power this down. Get this out of the way. And we'll try a different display I don't know how to use. Someone asked about this. I just got to find the display, but it's one of the ones they use for what is it? The spider configuration that someone asked about. Let me see if I can find that one. I might have to dig a bit for it. Apparently, if you don't know this, I have a large collection of displays. So knowing where they are is sometimes painful. So I might have to go in the other room and grab one. Now the camera might blink out because it's timed every 30 minutes. But I'll turn it back on if I'm out of the room in just a second. Oh, here's the actual displays. Well, some of them at least. Let me see if it's in this pile. Okay. So, if you don't know already, I'll move this under the camera so you can see. Let me just bring it up to the main camera. And the camera just blinked out, so let's restart it. So if you haven't seen before, I've got even more of these than I know what to do with. But there's a particular display someone asked about, so I'm gonna dig it out. This one probably will not work as designed. So this is the FISEC display. I've had a lot of issues with it. That's why you haven't seen a tutorial on it. I've actually purchased multiple versions of it. So as you can see, I have another one. Originally the plan was to do a video on it, but when I realized that it was not working right, I decided not to do a video because I didn't want you to buy something that would make you unhappy. So let me just clean up a quick second here, and we'll sort out what this display does. So this display on the back has an EXP1 and 2. So I'm gonna connect the EXP2 to the board. Now I might get these reversed, I'm just guessing, but we'll check in the actual documentation. So that is done. Let's go over and check the documentation just to make sure I'm not doing this wrong. So if we go back over to the desktop for a second, we'll go and we'll find the documentation. So if we go over to this one, you'll see EXP1, EXP2. So I'm guessing I correctly installed it. So I'm going to run power to it now and see what happens. Technically, you won't damage your board if you have it in backwards, but I like to check before I power things. That, and I want to put something here so this doesn't slide around. So give me a second. The fun thing about doing these tutorials live is that you don't know what's going to happen. So hopefully I can troubleshoot on the fly. And I'm going to weigh this down as soon as I get this in position. And I'll just slide this through. And we'll see if this illuminates. So it's not powering up. Now this one is known to have issues with power. So I might have to swap them. But let me swap these first and see what occurs. One of the reasons they don't work well, because their pinouts might be slightly different, as you can see. So let's plug this in. And it's still not powering up, but it's actually registering. So let me power this down again. We'll reverse these and see if there's an issue. Because you heard the ding for the connection, so that's what I'm looking at right now. So there's no ding. So that tells me that it's the other configuration for the wiring. So these are backwards. But this board I think also easily breaks. So this might be a broken one. I might have two others. I know I have one other. So that works. So I'm going to pull this board for a second and see if I can find another one that actually functions. This one I'm going to have to unscrew real quick. Originally I built it so that you could see what I was doing in a tutorial on the top and the bottom, but that apparently didn't come to fruition because, in my opinion, there's some issues with this board's reliability. It usually worked only the first time I plugged it in, and the second time it stopped working. Also, it's got a ZIF cable on it, or a really thin cable, and sometimes it comes out of its connection. I actually haven't sat down and tried to troubleshoot this board, but this one will be ready in a second. Just one more screw to remove. This also gives away how to configure it on the actual board. But the issue I found with this board was that it had a habit of breaking a connection. So let's do this one here, and this one here. And I'll check the power real quick. So it powers up, but there's no visual. So let's power it down. And this is probably a horrible example of something to troubleshoot for a particular display. Thus, it didn't make it to an actual tutorial. And it definitely is not powering up. So the ZIF cable is one issue. They should just solder it to the board, being having a pinout that comes directly through, because that can easily break. Also, if it flexes at all, it breaks, I think, a solder joint. So on this, I'd have to actually go through and probe it for continuity and also voltage, because that might be an issue. But one of these is a voltage pin. So what you can do over here is this. You can disconnect this and you can check to see which pins are voltage on it. So in this case, if we go over to the workbench on the computer, you can see that there's pins right here. This we would think is ground, but if we look over here, it's actually a signal pin. Then it's another signal pin, signal pin, signal pin, signal pin, signal pin, signal pin, then it's ground and voltage. So we know this is voltage probably. The same goes for over here, but there's no voltage pin, so we can check ground real easy. So I'm going to show you that as well. This is kind of duplicative in what I'm trying to show you, but the reason I'm trying to show you is so that you can see what the problems are. It's actually a mechanical issue on this particular board. So I'm going to put this over here, and then I'm going to find my jumper, and we'll start with ground. So ground is that pin, and we'll put it here. Then we'll roll this back in, put it on voltage, and we'll power it. So in this case, we now have this powered up. To check it, same as before, you'll click here, and you're looking for a 0 read, which you're getting. So you know that's okay. Now if you power this back down, and you then move it over here, this one should be 5 volts in theory. So you're going to touch here and touch here, and this is 4.72, which is approximately the power coming out of the power supply for USB in the cabling. So we know those are good. We could check to see if ground is the same over here. Probably shouldn't do that when the power's off, or power's on, pardon me. But you see it's 0. If you power this down, do the same over here. If I can get that in there. And check it again. So this means I'm not on the pin possibly. So it might be that I gave this a bad connection. Okay, that's on there. The jumper cables are notorious for bad connections. But it's driving right to 0, so I'm saying that's ground. So we know what these are, and then the other ones are signal pins. What you can do is this. I don't know how well this is going to work, so let me look on the other screen real quick. So I need to check something. I think it's FISEC, if I spell it right. Display. And then it is, I gotta look at the labeling on this. It's the Mini 12864. So essentially I'm Googling it so I can see the actual wiki, but let me bring it over so you can see now. So essentially over here they'll talk about the different versions, and then there should be something on pinouts, hopefully. And here you can see the pinouts. So EXP1 and then the definition. So down here you can tell that on certain boards it's going to be different, on other boards it's going to be something else. But essentially what they've done is they're saying what is where. So that's the first EXP. Then you have the next one. So as you can tell, it's not super clear where they are, but it might be that the actual pins are reversed, in which case you'll have to map those out. I generally avoid doing that these days. because I just want an easy configuration to show you. But it might be that the connector is backwards, being the notch connector, because you see the notches right here on the connector for what they're showing, and then right here, and then it's solid on the other side. So if we were to trace out the pins, we'd know that it's actually down here. So voltage is here and ground is here, which means that it's 180 degrees in the wrong direction. So we'd shave off the actual little notch and reverse it. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So if I go over to the workbench, on here there's a notch that you can probably barely see. You could take a razor blade and take that off, and then you can take this and actually reverse the direction. It won't harm the board, but that might be one of the issues because it's not really designed for this configuration. It's similar to the maker-based configuration where you have to flip it, or the FiSec you may have to flip it. So that's one of those things that comes up every once in a while. But if you can find the pinout diagram, you can trace down these problems. Let me check on the chat because I've been going on a bit. Stuck on the screen. Is the video okay, everyone? Or is it that I was stuck on the wrong screen when I was talking? Which is probably more likely the case. So let me transition back so you can see what I was talking about. Essentially, they're saying the BCC pin is here on EXP1. Then they're showing the little bolt right here where there's a cutout. And then down here on our board is where the actual voltage and ground resides. So they're backwards. They have the ground here, and they have the voltage here. And if we look at our configuration, you can see that you have ground here and voltage here. So that might be one of the reasons it's not working. But it's also one of the reasons I didn't do a tutorial for the Octopus board with that display, because I didn't want you to spend money and then be unhappy. So it's one way for me to avoid making you frustrated. Also, for those that don't know, up on Patreon I do post videos in advance of release. So as you can see, there's a new video up there. Usually I post 1 or 2 a week, depending upon how much time I have, depending upon how busy I am at my actual job. But as you can see, there's a new video that'll be coming out in the next couple days or week, and it talks about the variable fan voltages and how to test it. So let me check on the chat real quick because I know I'm bouncing around here. Yeah, occasionally I forget to actually change the actual display that you're seeing. So I'll show you what's going on. Over in here, for the controls, I can transition between different screens. Obviously you can't see them right now, but I can do this so I can see the actual screen. And then if I want to go to my desktop, right now it's sitting on the desktop so you see what I'm doing. But then there's other things where I have the actual configuration so I can work with this and then just translate it over so you can see. That's sometimes me being a little lazy pressing the button, but unfortunately it's hard to keep track of everything at once, so on occasion you'll just have to let me know in the chat what you're seeing and then I'll fix it. So let's see, what else can I cover in troubleshooting that makes sense today? Stepper motors I usually go over in the videos, so that's somewhat involved. I actually did that in the first troubleshooting tutorial. There is something else I wanted to cover. I just have to clean up the desktop real quick. So essentially, let me clean the workbench here so that you can actually see the next one because I made this confusing the other day. So I want to try and make it less confusing. But there is something else I queued up here on my desk. And that is Ferrule connectors. So if you don't know about this already, when you're using something like a heater cartridge inside your extruder, it usually comes like this. What you want to do is actually put a ferrule connector on these so you get a good connection. So let me show you this real quick. So we have a ferrule tool right here that we can use to actually tighten down the connector. So when you first get this tool, if you buy one, there is an issue where they set it looser for bigger connections, so you'll have to adjust it by removing the screw and then moving this over and putting the screw back in. But then it'll work fine. But let me show you how to do this real quick. Essentially, you're going to strip this by finding the gauge of the wire, then you'll hold it and pop it off. Now you may have to peel back some of the actual insulation around it. Normally I trim it with a pair of scissors, but as soon as you get that out of the way, what you'll do is you'll grab a ferrule connection. In this case, I gotta find what I think is the right size. I think it's gonna be like this. And essentially, you'll slide this over here, and then you'll take out your ferrule tool. You'll slide it into the ferrule tool, crimp it down, and if you've done it right, it'll stay on nice and tight. And then that will go into your power supply leads on here, which you can then terminal down on. It gives you a perfect connection if you've done it right, so that you can avoid issues with bad connections. So now that I got that one out of the way, let me do the one on the monitors real quick here. Just got to get some tools out of the way and clean up this desk and take this apart real quick. Of course, I moved the screwdriver, so this is going to be fun. Now I got to guess where I put it, so hopefully this will work. There we go. Oh, the screwdriver's up above. One of the ways to avoid a lot of bad situations, by the way, is try and keep your environment as clean as possible. I obviously have an issue with that, meaning I don't keep it super clean. But I also, when I'm doing these tutorials, use some things to make things safer for me so that things don't slide around, and that is putty. And this is a special type of putty that's non-conductive that allows me to make sure that I don't slide the board around while I'm working on it during a tutorial. But it also means that I have to then clean it up after I'm done. And essentially it means pulling off the putty on the board because it sticks to it. But it's super safe for me to demonstrate stuff to you so that I can clean the board off. And another thing that I usually don't cover anymore is that the pins are actually written on the board. Also the version of the board, and then you can see the actual power. This is the silk screen that I'm talking about, and most people know what silk screen means, but essentially it's what they use to print on the board. So let me get this out of the way and show you the other thing I wanted to talk about. Let me clean up the surface here because this is going to be very large. So there's several display types for Big Tree Tech. And I didn't go into a great explanation of them. So I'm going to see if I can zoom out a little here so you can see. So essentially that's one type of display. That's the TFT35. And then you can see that it's E3 V2 or V3. Then we have another one, which is the TFT 35V2. Then we have another one called the TFT 35MZ version 3. And I'm doing this so you can get an idea of what I was talking about the other day. We have a TFT 24 v1.1, and I probably have several more. Here's an older one. It's the Big Tree Tech TFT 35 v1.2. So what I was talking about might not have made sense last night or a couple nights ago. So essentially what I'm going to show you is this. There's a configuration for loading the firmware where you have to specify the actual type of display. So if we go over to Big Tree Tech's website for a second, apparently my computer's moving slow all of a sudden. So let's see if this will get cleaned out. There we go. Let me reset it so you can read it. And let me go back and do this again. There we go. So this is the touchscreen firmware. The way that they lay it out is kind of confusing. But as you can see, it says TFT 24 v1.1. That would be this one. Then if we go back and you see TFT v3, you're going to see several versions. Like there's an E3 right here. If we go back over to the desktop, this one is the E3 right there. Now if we look at the other ones, you'll see that it's TFT 35V2. So if we go back over to the configuration, you can see that there's a TFT 35V2 hopefully in this list. They may sometimes leave them out, but they have several different types. So this might be an older generation one, in which case, oh, there we go, V2. So here's the configuration. The last part of this is actually the version of the build. So they've had 27 versions for the bin file. So this is the counter they use when they check it into, in this case, GitHub. This is the version of the actual display, and this is the size. So some of these are going to be slightly confusing. Unfortunately, I added to the confusion. I understand they only have one for the TFT 70, which hopefully on Monday that'll come in, or Tuesday, and I can do a tutorial on that. But there's a bunch of different displays. They may even mix in other brands. Like MKS is actually MakerBase, so it looks like they're covering them as well. Let me check on the chat real quick. Okay, it looks like everything's going well in the chat. Let me see if I can bring up the other chat. There was a tool inside of here where I can actually see the full chat and how many people I've got. Give me a second to see if I can see it. Apparently it's not showing it to me today. Let's see. Well, apparently Restream is not being quite nice with me today, so I'm going to leave that alone for now. But if you guys have questions, I want to show you where you can actually post them, or ideas for actual videos. Over on my Discord channel, which is located in the description of this video and others, you can post what you want to see for YouTube requests. Some of the requests, if they're rather cost prohibitive, I might not do them. Or if they require a lot of space, I do have issues with that. So I'll show you this real quick. Let's just see if I can get this into the correct environment. Sorry, I'm dragging things around. Here we go. So this is where you can post YouTube requests. And if it's not a hard thing to do or expensive, I'll eventually get to it. But a lot of ideas up here are different things people want to see. Also, there's general chat over here. This is where you can actually have a chat with many different people, and they might have a different perspective or understanding of the problem and be able to help you if I'm not available. There's also a BTT TFT section. There's print quality, where people talk about different ways to improve their print quality. As you can see, some people have mastered it quite well. Then there's, let's see, the BL Touch, which is always a conversation. This mostly boils down to the connector cable for your signal and ground. Apparently there's an issue where they give you a jumper connector wire that lengthens it and causes issues. So a lot of people talk about how to configure it in here. Then we have share your designs. If you've got something you want to share, you can always post it up here. There are a lot of different designs that people talk about. And then of course we have Clipper, which is a different firmware that you can use on the motherboard for most motherboards, if not all. And essentially this has to do with a different way to step on printing. It's kinematic, I believe, which is motion in most languages, from Latin, I guess. But needless to say, that is a lot of the subject matter that's covered in the actual GitHub. And the GitHub, or excuse me, the Discord is actually free to everyone. I'm not always available, but I'm available a lot of the time. But obviously during the work week, I won't be as available as normal because I have meetings and things that I have to work on. So at least you have an idea of the actual scope of what I'm trying to cover for you. And once again, I need to thank my patrons as well as the people that donate on PayPal and also on the stream for their financial help keeping these going, because obviously parts have gone up in price. So part of my issue right now is actually being able to get access to new parts that are reasonably priced. So if people donate on something like Patreon or on PayPal or in stream, preferably the best place to donate is either on Patreon or on PayPal, because YouTube takes a large cut. I think it's upwards of 33%. I can't remember exactly. It might be 40%. Whereas in this case, you can sidestep that issue and everything is taken care of. But at this point, I think I've been talking a little bit long and I'm starting to stutter a bit. So I'm just going to check on the chat real quick here, hopefully. Apparently, the actual display for me gets a little wonky, so I have to actually go over and check it. But I just refreshed it, so oh, there it is, download app. So maybe I can see now in the browser. Apparently Restream makes this real fun for me. So they recently changed their interface, so I'm trying to relearn it. But at this moment I want to take you, or thank you, for taking a moment to watch. And I'll be posting obviously new tutorials soon. But I'll be spending a lot of the day today recording. So if I don't respond right away, it's probably because I'm recording tutorials and posting them to Patreon. So everyone take care, be safe. Thank you very much for taking the time to stop by, and I'll catch up with you later.